We are now one pick away.
Oh,
We have the 104 in our second draft. McCaffrey and Hill go with the first 2 picks.
look at that. Sean is running the point, gets us into our second draft. We are on the clock at the 104. The top 3 went in order. I'm very open here. Looks like by your ranks, it's Jamar Chase. That's the ADP pick. That's probably the pick that I would make.
So we will take Chase. I do think that is one of my first shares there in Best Ball Mania. Now that we have Chase, are there any early paths that we need to be kind of aware of? One of the things I mentioned as we were closing out the last draft and sort of the show that will be that version of the SB shorts was this idea that when you do have Lamb, I think that it's pretty compelling to go ahead and take the reach on Devontae Smith. I think that he's undervalued. Are there players that you're immediately kind of starting to track when we have Cincinnati? And one of the things is that I do love their week 17 with Denver. I think that that has the potential to be one of these shootouts that doesn't seem like a shootout yet, but once you get midway through the 2024 season, people will be pretty excited about it. But the other element there is that I think there are some later Cleveland Browns who are pretty interesting too. So to be able to get your week 16, week 17 with Jamar Chase, that part of it is actually not very difficult, which then raises the question of like how specifically Cincinnati heavy do you want to be? Or if
Good
Chase is
question.
really the only guy that we're that excited about from that particular team.
Yeah, and at the end of the last draft, you talked about when we took Stroud, we weren't able to take the value on Dak. I found that an interesting point because we were also talking about it in the context of taking an earlier tight end, and we got quote unquote value on Bowers of about 40 picks by your ranks, but apparently the 7-pick value of Dak was more beneficial because you've already taken so much Brock Bowers. But when you say that about the Bengals and who immediately comes to mind, I've taken a ton of Javonte Williams. I am really happy to take late Bo Nix as like the back end of a QB build if we end up pushing into a late round quarterback build. And then I take a lot of Sutton, right? Like I think he's sort of before the QB window in best ball. We talked on the last show about where to put those guys, that veteran tier of receivers. But Javonte and Sutton for me are kind of the immediate answers to that question. We're back up. ADP value is Devontae Adams. You have him ranked quite a bit behind there. You're
only at 33.
Yeah. Your pick would be Neighbors. Neighbors or Debo. I'll let you make this selection. I know you haven't picked out of the slot a lot. I've made these builds a lot. I tend to go Adams in these areas. So who do you like? Looks like we're going to go Debo. I have not taken enough Debo, so that's great.
Perfect,
so we go.
I think that Neighbors could potentially come back around. It's possible that Stephon Diggs could come back around. For me, Devontae Adams just not. I mean, he's a fine pick here. I have timed out a couple times on Devontae Adams, and I think that's where you want to get your Devontae Adams exposure is when you time out.
He's a fine pick here, but also when I time out and draft him, I want to quit the draft immediately.
So you can go ahead and auto pick the whole rest of it. You will get a team
up.
that works well with Devontae Adams.
Devontae Adams was, I'm going to tell you exactly. He was second in the NFL in weighted targets per out run last year, or tied-ish for second. Maybe he was third.
Is that a stat that you like, Ben? Is that one where we get a good sense of like how much volume they actually have?
That's one that I do tend to pay attention to. The yards per target was really bad. The efficiency was really bad. Maybe he's lost a step, etc. But the offense is similarly thin behind him. I mean, they add Bowers. Obviously, that's not like thin, but there's not a lot of depth beyond.
I just can't believe you're not giving your boy Jacoby Myers credit for being on this team.
I mean, like, even if he's a pro bowler, like, there's still enough volume for Davante Adams to do some stuff. Like, who is Michael Mayer going to be? Who's going to be the offense?
Well, I mean, it's going to be Davante Adams and Brock Bowers, as you say. But I mean, think about what Bowers did to Ladd McConkey, Jermaine Burton, and Adonai Mitchell when those guys were peers, and you get a sense of what he can do to players that otherwise people like. I mean,
do you have any of those guys ranked ahead of ADP? I think you dislike all three of those Georgia receivers, right?
Well, I mean, they're a huge step down from Brock Bowers.
From Brock Bowers. So Malik Neighbors made it back, Sean. I think we are contractually forced to take him. We could take Kyron. You just start him. He's a value here too. Sam Laporta's there at 304. He's been going a little higher than that. I mean, I would smash Neighbors here personally when you get this opportunity, but because he often goes in the late second or early third. It is nice to get him in the middle of the third. We've talked about this structurally. To start three receivers is really nice.
I really like that. And I guess with Kyron Williams, just when you see the draft that we were able to just do, when you make no effort at running back at all. And it was kind of funny, Ben, because you were saying that was maybe your best running back room. I think that was maybe my weakest running back room. I mean, that's how, and I'm not drafting running backs early. That's just how easy it is to build at that position. And so even though I think that both Achane and Williams are like weirdly undervalued right now and should both be going ahead of Saquon Barkley, I guess I don't think that you have to pick them. And with Williams, I have come around to this idea that there's a little bit more risk maybe than I was thinking originally, but also even if there's an injury that, you know, in almost all of the scenarios has no relevance for the regular season, but a guy is not able to practice during the off season, isn't getting the reps, is losing. And Kyron Williams doesn't have anything to prove, right? But if your backup / committee mate gets a chance to show what he can do, I guess this foot injury has maybe spooked me a tiny bit, maybe out of proportion with what it means. And yet I guess it does to me justify going ahead and passing on someone who, again, I mean, in the middle of round 3, I don't think makes a lot of sense for him to be there.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't think, you have to take Kyron by any means. And no, the comment about the best running back room, I realized that immediately that was kind of an exaggeration, because I did do a Kyron Achane build. I did take some early running backs in some of my slows. So certainly the 0 RB team we built in our first draft today was not the best group that I've put together. It was probably the best 0 RB group I've put together, though. We got some really good values, a really fun 0 RB build there. We're winding back toward our pick at 409 with our 3 receivers. It's a very similar spot to what we did in our last draft at the 412, 501. You had asked me at that point what my preference would be. Trey McBride just went. That would have been the absolute smash thing, as if he somehow fell to 45. What would your preference be? What do you want to see fall here as we're narrowing down to our pick?
Well, I did think there was a possibility for T. Higgins to make it to us, even though his ADP is right where he went. But there's a kind of a humorous situation here where the top 2 players by ADP, one of them I had ranked 28th and the other one I had ranked 60th. The one I ranked 60th did just go, which is sort of fun. Josh Jacobs is no longer available to us. I guess I don't love the ADP values here, and so I would be willing to make some reaches for guys that we like, or I would be willing to do some things a little bit differently from a build perspective, take a quarterback, something like that. But Travis Etienne is probably pretty compelling, even as we try and get receivers.
I haven't taken any Etienne, but he is 5+ picks behind ADP at this spot. You little bit surprised where you have him ranked, frankly. But you have him ranked ahead of that. We go ahead and take him there. Sorry, I didn't want to confuse anything. Typically, I would in this spot because the top receivers are George Pickens, Amari Cooper. When I get to that spot is when I take a tight end. So typically, I would have went to Kincaid there. Although I'm not sure that I've had that decision with ETN falling to there. That specific decision with the ETN ADP value, I maybe would have taken a share of ETN if given that opportunity, because we can still do tight end in the 5th, the 6th, potential. No, not the 7th, the 5th, or the potentially coming back in the 6th. They might both go, but this is again the game where you can play where maybe Kittle comes back to you in the 6th. We're a little bit further up in the 6th. It's a possibility you could have Kittle as your tight end 1 that still can play. I would have probably just gone like if you go Kincaid there. The reason I'm fine with that is I don't really like the Pickens and Cooper values, and I would probably take the Keenan Allen, Christian Kirk, Terry McLaurin 5th round wide receivers over them straight up anyway, and probably want to go wide receiver in the 4-5 range at that point. And so with this build, I would have, again, had ATN not been there, I would have probably went tight end and then come back with a wide receiver and been 4 receivers and 1 tight end through 5. Xavier Worthy, another one you just put into the queue that makes a lot of sense in that mid 5th. And I mean, how is George Pickens going mid 4th? And it's just, anyway, that's obviously Xavier Worthy should be going ahead of George Pickens, like by a lot.
It seems like it. One of the things that's nice is that there are some players who you're going to draft pretty rarely that will push some guys down. I would put Pickens, White, and Amari Cooper all in that category. And we're now going to get a tight end. I mean, we need someone to still pass here to get our guy. But I think taking ETN worked very nicely there. He's someone who I will put in that same category with Achane and Williams, where I think that
he timed out and took Kincaid.
That's unfortunate.
Kincaid was the ADP value by a couple slots, and the guy in front of us that you said was our guy that we were hoping to have come back. He takes on a timeout. So we're going to take Andrews again here.
We definitely can. I mean, I would also be open to taking Xavier Worthy if that.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, let's go ahead and
we'll just keep
That'll
pushing the tight ends down a little bit and see if, because that side of the draft is where Laporta, McBride, and Kelsey all went. There's a possibility pushing Andrews that way helps bring Pitts or Kittle back in the 6th. Probably not Pitts, but maybe Kittle.
And one of the things that I think you have to keep a little bit of an eye on too is that I do think it's easier to get the secondary guys when you have a pick in the first half. And so we have the potential for a Pitts or Kittle faller. And then you can't necessarily count on this, but Ingram and Njoku and Bowers all tend to go in that half as well, to at least give you some other potential options. I like going ahead and getting Xavier Worthy there. The point I was going to make about ETN is that he's one of those guys where I'm probably not drafting him exactly where I have him ranked, which again, then, I mean, obviously you've got to question the rankings in that situation, but it is something where it's structural decisions that you're making as opposed to a little bit of what I do have is going to simply reflect where I think the players are within their position. And then if you didn't feel like you needed to do the same thing structurally that I'm doing, where I think that some of these guys should go. And so if you end up in a situation where ETN falls below ADP and you've already gotten the 3 receivers to start, then that for me is absolutely perfect. In the same kind of situation where, because we had started wide receiver, we certainly could have taken Kyron Williams, but the thing with the running backs is just you need so few of them early that if you pass on Williams, you can take the faller of ETN. So those are some of the tensions that you're dealing with in terms of looking at the positions relative to each other, and then also considering what you want to do as it relates to the rankings.
The faller here, Sean, at the 5-6 turn is Stroud, which is interesting. He's almost 10 picks behind ADP. The Tank Dell drafter just passed him to take James Cook, maybe trying to get Stroud to come around. Had started with 4 straight receivers. Stroud goes unstacked at the turn there. I was wondering if that might happen. And you're not getting any of the top 3 receivers now. They're already all off the board. That unstacked conversation is always a really interesting one.
When you're talking about how it could perform for you in terms of advance, do you like Stroud with, say, a Joe Mixon, who, as I say that, is the next pick?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you take Stroud there, you do still want to get into the other parts of the Texans offense. My immediate thought is that you have to get Dalton Schultz then. You have to take him around early. Because Stroud is not super mobile. He's a drop back passer. And if he's a star in the 5th round, I don't think the other people all have to pay a really high price for the top 3 Houston pass catchers. And so what you do have is players in those rounds, round 2, round 3, round 4, that, the opportunity cost of stacking Stroud with one of those guys is a lot of investment in the Texans early, which we did in our last stream. And you pass up some really good players. We talked about some of those scenarios at the end of the first Stealing Banana Shorts draft that we did this week. And so if you're right on those other players where you took Stroud's other, would have taken his other receivers, this drafter is a Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison drafter at the turn, Cooper Kupp, Travis Kelce at the next turn. If Harrison can pay off that price, if Cooper Kupp can pay off that price, if Travis Kelce is a tight end 1 again, then that can all be separate from the CJ Stroud conversation. CJ Stroud can still be right. And you can still beat some of the Stroud stacked teams, of which there will be very many, because the stack lines up very nicely on the other turn when Stroud doesn't fall. But yeah, I still would want somebody who can catch some touchdowns from him in those playoff weeks. So whether that's Mixon or whether that's, probably for me, Dalton Schultz immediately becomes a priority. Wow, Sean, Evan Ingram just went ahead of Kittle. And then Kittle went. Dang. 2 picks before us.
That would have been nice. I was also going to say, this is our shot to take your boy, Rome Odunze, and he goes the pick right ahead of us. I guess I'm back to Addison as being like clear cut the only real option here. Is there someone I'm missing?
No.
Okay.
Burrow. I don't think we want to take him there. That's the only thing. Yeah, so we go Addison. We were low on the clock. I did the last minute. Addison was the right pick there. In terms of who you were potentially missing, Burrow does have an ADP that puts him right at our next pick. So if we didn't want to take Addison again, I would have said we could stack Chase at 609. But I don't think we needed to do that. I don't even know that. I think it'd be hard for me to pass up JSN and Rashee Rice, who are glaring values in the 7th. But I don't know. I guess.
The Higgins drafter does have Anthony Richardson. And a lot of the teams in between have QBs. I certainly think that we would be the Richardson drafter could take 2 early QBs. I think that teams who don't have a QB certainly could just do the same thing that the Stroud drafter did and be thinking about Jermaine Burton.
It's a long stretch to our next pick. He's a 76.9 ADP. We're on the clock at 76 at 704. It's got to come all the way back to 809. What is that? It's a lot of picks. He's got to fall 12-ish picks behind ADP. But I'm totally comfortable with the wide receiver pick here too. What do you think?
Yeah, we need to get as many of these Addison JSN teams put together before people realize that like second-year breakout candidates should be priced a little bit differently. I also think that Rashee Rice would have been an interesting pick there and kind of lean into. some of the Kansas City element. One of the things with that is you're obviously not going to get Patrick Mahomes. And then, I mean, this team could easily set up that the guy we actually do want is Pat Freiermuth, and he got a little bit of buzz in the last few days as someone who is working well with Russell Wilson. One of my problems there is that Russell Wilson is not going to be their quarterback, but the Chiefs, if you're trying to add a second Chief, I think that you would probably have already wanted to have set it up with Patrick Mahomes as well. And then for me, it is just unfortunate and annoying that they have the Steelers in week 17. That's keeping me from getting too heavy with Rice coming back when I already have Worthy.
I do have a lot of Worthy Rice teams. So my thesis, Sean, is the Kansas City ADPs are just wrong.
They are wrong.
In collection, if Travis Kelce's a 4th-round pick now because they're going to limit his routes, you can't explain it. And Rashee Rice is going in the 7th round because of the looming suspension. Then Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy in the 5th round don't make a whole bunch of sense. And I think if you identify these situations, because, I mean, I started to write this. I'm working on a piece for the Stealing Signal Substack that's this perfect storm candidates. Talk a little bit about the Bijan stuff. Talk a little bit about the Broncos running backs. We've talked about the Bo Nix effect and Sean Payton stuff. The Kansas City pass catchers is in the first section. And I went and looked up their pass rate over expected, PROE numbers. Working back from 2023, Sean, here's their rank in the Patrick Mahomes era in PROE per our buddy Michael Leone. 2023, first. 2022, first. 2021, first. 2020, first. 2019, first. 2018, second.
But Ben, they added such good running backs in the offseason.
That includes last year where they had the worst receivers in the Patrick Mahomes era. You have the efficiency and volume element. Other pass games can match in their ceiling outcomes, but it's the default for the Kansas City pass game. There's nothing like it on the other 31 teams. You can't be this confident in pass volume plus efficiency in any other pass game. It's a tremendous opportunity for drafters to get these prices on pieces of Patrick Mahomes offenses and Andy Reid offenses, because I go back to the pre-Patrick Mahomes era, and they were still a top 10 team in 4 of the 5 Andy Reid seasons prior to Mahomes. Then they shot up to, first. Once Andy Reid added Mahomes, he was like, well, yeah, I'm going to do it every play. I'm just going to throw. He was always ahead of the curve with the pass forward offenses, though. We did that in Philly for years. So I think if you identify that type of thing, you make the bet on 2 of the receivers in the same build. I've taken Kelce, Rashee Rice teams, not as many Xavier Worthy, Marquise Brown teams because they go right next to each other. But I think you can stack these 2 of these guys up even without Mahomes, and you're just saying this is a bet on the pass volume and the efficiency of the offense. We are back on the clock.
Those guys did make it pretty deep, but they did not make it all the way back to us. My top 2 guys here are tight ends. Are you comfortable going with Njoku right here?
Sure. Yeah. Because you talked about the week 16 thing as well. So it gives us the Cleveland, Cincinnati. We did not get Burrow back to us. We had not taken a tight end. This is if you do miss out on the top 7 tight ends, that next group that includes Njoku and Bowers, we've made this case recently, Sean, but it's still strong. Like it's a tier down, but it's still stronger than the next tier down should be from the elite tier in any given year. Njoku coming off a career high yards per route run, some new interesting usage with some block and release. He basically became their outlet receiver. I understand a lot of that was with Flacco, but it was the way that they used him in a block and release game as the dump off guy. It was like they wanted him to be their outlet receiver as opposed to a running back. And it worked because he's big and he's fast and he's strong and he can move with the ball in his hands after getting these short catches. I don't think it's guaranteed to carry over without Flacco, but it's all very positive that he's coming off the best year of his career. You are obviously in love with Brock Bowers for good reason. Evan Ingram's another one outside that big seven that is still a strong profile outside that big seven. I mean, I don't know why Jake Ferguson goes where he does, Sean, but the rest of it is a really good tier in that next group. We get Njoku. We've gotten to the turn with Bowers still there. I would love an Njoku Bowers build. We don't get any of the top 7 guys, but we still get the 2 early-ish tight ends that we've talked through as options. He does go at 902, 2 picks ahead of us. If we would have got him, we would have still been taking him a fraction of a pick ahead of ADP. We're back up. You have 2 QBs at the top of the queue, and we don't have either of their receivers. What's the case?
Well, those guys can run some. Caleb Williams is week 17 with Seattle, comes back with JSN. We could take Cole Kmet. I know you're still pretty high on him. Raheem Mostert might otherwise be the pick. Jayden Daniels, always good, just in isolation.
I think I would probably do a Daniels if you can pull him over Caleb. Just because to me it's easier if we don't get the stack. I know Caleb's a bring back on JSN, but and he's mobile too. But Daniels, the thesis is that he could run at a degree that isn't necessary to stack. We could do it through Sanat as well, which isn't that big of a difference from the Kmet play.
I love it. I mean, my goal was to get as close to 100% of Jayden Daniels as I could this season. He's gotten a little bit more expensive to make it a little bit trickier. And I mean, frankly, his receiving options are not particularly compelling, but
right.
I mean,
he still is.
This is Anthony Richardson with, I don't know, elite, but above average passing ability. I don't think that there should be the gap in ADP between Anthony Richardson and Jayden Daniels just because Richardson managed to kind of sequence his way to looking like a superstar around the injuries last season. I would say that I think both guys are good picks.
I think that's a reasonable take. I think a lot of people were already really in on Richardson, his ability to, or his history of not taking a lot of sacks, and he's bigger in size and all of that. I think people are really afraid of some of the hits Daniels took last year in college football. It's interesting though. Like
Richardson has already been hurt, right? I mean,
right.
He's already demonstrated that he can't stay healthy, and by can't, but just that he hasn't. And so,
yeah, but he took an unnecessary shot on a rushing TD that led to a concussion in week 2. As he was going in, he kind of just made himself, it was kind of a cheap shot, but he kind of made himself available to take a hit that was kind of like, just like, don't cross the goal line right there, right into a defender. You know, like he could have easily kind of veered off. Ends up hurting his shoulder a couple weeks later. To your point, I don't think people realize, like, Richardson was awesome. He had 4 rushing TDs in fewer than 3 full games of play. I don't think people realize how little he actually played. He had 4 games. 2 of them he left early with those injuries, with the concussion and then ultimately the shoulder that knocked him out for the year. He only played about a third of the snaps in both of those 2 games. It was like 32%, 33% in both. He had 2 full games and 2 1/3 games. It's about 2 2/3 total. And he still had the 4 rushing TDs, tons of rushing yards, a lot of, efficiency, some exciting stuff in the passing, better passing than I thought there would be. But you called it sequencing his way to upside. I think that's a fair point. I do think Richardson can break fantasy football this year. I also think he's priced where that's already baked in, and we didn't get enough last year to know it for sure. It reminds me a little bit of how excited I was about Trey Lance going into year 2. And I've taken some Richardson. I'm not saying, like, I've defended the Lance pick before. Stealing Bananas listeners know that. So I'm not saying that the Richardson pick is bad on its face, but I think you draw a really interesting comparison between Daniels and Richardson because it seems like the market is saying that Daniels is the big risk to get hurt. And yet Richardson is the one that did, and we don't necessarily even know how good he is. I do feel better about his offensive staff. I'll say that. Shane Steichen did a really good job with Gardner Minshew the rest of the year. I like the way they designed that offense. I don't like Cliff Kingsbury. So, I mean, that's a major point.
Well, and the receiving weapons for Anthony Richardson are now fantastic. So if he actually were able to pass successfully, I think he could have a huge season because those guys are good. I mean, I think that Adonai Mitchell is not undervalued now in fantasy. I think he was undervalued. I guess I shouldn't say undervalued because there were some people really high on him, some people really low on him. I think that the really high is more likely to be correct, and he's a perfect fit for rounding out what they had at receiver. So with the surrounding weapons and the coaching staff, if he can do it, then the sky is absolutely the limit, and the numbers could be crazy. The thing I would point out is just Jayden Daniels is also a much better runner. And so from that perspective, I think you have additional upside as well. It would have been interesting to discuss Brock Purdy with Daniels kind of together there. Obviously, we have Deebo Samuel, but he does go 2 picks ahead of us. We're kind of right back to that Chase Brown pick here, unless you have any interest in Chubb or Eckler. Just
not at this price. I was gonna joke that I feel like in every slow I'm in, it's like legally required that I have to have Chubb, Eckler, and Gus Edwards as the top 3 running backs in the queue at some point. And every time I'm there, I'm like, all right, well, let's go down to Chase Brown. Let's go down to Tyjae Spears. Those guys are have the lower ADPs, and I'm just going to hit them. And when you already have the Burrow, Jamar Spears, by the way, already off the board in this particular draft, but when you already have the Burrow Chase thing built out, it's a Chase Brown team. It's just there's no question. It's just too easy.
Yeah. It's certainly still a good value on the guy who, should be ranked 78th if you're following the official.
I did a Burrow Chase team where I took Moss because he fell a little bit, and then I also took Brown because he went like 3 picks behind ADP, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. So I'll just take both of them because like the Bengals running backs are so underpriced. It's absurd.
And I don't tend to like doing that, but I have made the case that both of those guys are going to score enough points and that both of them are going to help you in enough different weeks that, that it's such a unique situation where I like that play. I'm not going to do it a lot just because there won't be that many drafts where it doesn't make sense, but the one that you just articulated would fit in that category.
It did. Yeah. That's the only time I've done it. But I was like, if I'm going to get them both at an ADP discount and I already have the Burrow Chase bet on the Bengals offense, I'm going to do it. We're back up. We got the Charbonnet Lloyd thing again. Man, the running backs are just sitting there. Oh, that's your rank. That's not by ADP. Oh, Eckler's the pick by ADP, of course. Yeah, I would love to take one of these running backs.
So let's go ahead and we'll sort of double down on some of the things that we did in the last draft.
But I think that makes sense. I got asked this, Sean. Sorry to cut you off, but I got asked this recently.
No, then you have to do things differently just because, different is good.
Right. I got asked that about my slows. Am I intentionally this concentrated and all that stuff? And part of it was, the answer was yes. And we've talked about this on Stealing Bananas, and you're even more so than me in that way, I think. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm like willing to go that direction. I don't think it's necessarily wrong. But the other big part of that answer is that it's May. Like, we think some of these ADPs are wrong. I want to get as much exposure to Zach Charbonnet, or not. Well, we took Charbonnet here in the 11th because we can potentially get Marshawn Lloyd in the next round. But the Chase Brown price, the Lloyd price, the Kendre Miller price. The more that we emphasize these on Stealing Bananas, we're probably not helping ourselves, Sean. But I want to draft them as much as possible because these prices do change. And they tend to change fairly quickly when you really emphasize them the way we are right now. I want to keep taking the prices that I think are broken in basically every May draft I can, because I'm not confident I'm going to continue to get these prices all off season. I'll figure that out later. If they somehow get cheaper, then I'll make a different decision or something. Like I've had to think through that with Rashee Rice, for example. But I think if you're drafting this early and you have a strong belief that there's mispricings, that you should hammer them. You should be as exposed as you can be at the wrong prices. You could still take them at the higher prices if you want to get different types of builds into your portfolio. But I think people worry too much. They're like, yeah, don't you want to be taking them later? And you don't want to be too overexposed at the end of the day. It's like, well, if he winds up going 4 rounds higher, and I think he's a good pick 4 rounds higher, then I want him in every single May draft. I mean, I'm willing to be that concentrated, or however you say that. I don't. If I lose,
because there's some risk that like Nick Chubb and Austin Eckler are going to be easy to pick multiple rounds later. I mean, they're fallers here, but a little bit of what that's indicating to me when you start to see them pretty frequently at the top of the queue is that, why would you draft him as a value here when you could draft him just 2 rounds later in a couple of months? Now, there may be a point where they actually come back up a little bit too. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, the medical stuff on Chubb is difficult, and some people are very out. I can certainly understand why that's the case. I do think there's a chance that he pulls an Adrian Peterson type of move, even though it's different, and then he rises, and so then you miss out. And yet at the same time, is that the thing that really is causing you a problem as you try and balance your picks again, as you said, in May?
We should talk Chubb a little bit more. We're almost on the board here. Lloyd went. If Miller doesn't go, so Tua went. Do you like just going Miller here, or is there something else you're seeing?
Well, the other possibility would be to go with Kmet and Freiermuth, one of those guys who fit kind of playing off of some of our receivers, but certainly targeting the receiver from our actual QB, or I should say tight end, is probably the way that I would do it. So I think it's probably Miller here.
Yeah, let's do Miller. I agree with you on the Chubb thing. He's already come back from one major knee injury. I tried to talk through this on a recent Stealing Signals, because I did take him, but I it's exactly what you just described. I want to get an even bigger discount because I'm seeing him fall in every draft. When we talked through him at our last opportunity, it was a little bit behind ADP. I think his ADP is going to shift. One of my commenters had said at the time, I see the slide stop around pick 130, and I know we were looking at a team where I'd taken him 129, and so in this draft, I think he ended up going 124, and that's what I was thinking when you mentioned him first. I was like, I still would like to see him fall further. I know I've taken him at like 135 before, or 140 even, maybe. Like, he can really, really fall. But I have taken him 3 or 4 times once he starts to fall to that degree, because like, people were talking about Tyjae Spears not having an ACL last year, right? And like, I who knows what happens, but we know the ways that like muscles help joints, and Nick Chubb is a very muscular man. Like, he was able to come back from knee injuries in the past. Maybe he's just athletically different. There's not a lot of people that I'd be willing to make that bet on, but you say the Adrian Peterson thing, it's similar in the regard that Nick Chubb and Adrian Peterson are outlier rushers in their careers. Like, these are incredible players. We did just get back up, Sean. Top of our queue, Jalen Wright and Ben Sinnott. I would take Sinnott 7 picks ahead of ADP here just to stack up Daniels and get our tight end 2. Are you comfortable with that, or do you like to push him here?
I would probably push him, but because I think that in part, I think a decent chunk of what that is Jayden Daniels drafters doing just what we did. And so if you don't take him there, then you can take him the next pick around. But I do like him enough. We've said pretty frequently on OT, which just, you get in trouble with, but that he's this year's Sam Laporta. When you're balancing out all of those absurd or just the enthusiastic Brock Bowers picks with this tight end who is nowhere near Brock Bowers, but is very athletic, and I think could be the best fit in the offense for the rookie QB. I think you have to like those two guys together. One of the things is I do think that this team potentially sets up as a quarterbacks unstacked type of roster where you could go in with multiple hybrid quarterbacks and say that's how this team is going to get it done. And one of the things I do really believe in is that type of scenario in terms of getting through weeks 15, 16, and 17 is there and isn't going to be played that frequently. Certainly, probably not by drafters who maybe are building some of the other things out the right way. So I don't think that you have to have that. And it is in some ways too bad to lose Wright because his ceiling is so high and we didn't have a rookie running back on this team. So taking that risk, I think, would make sense in this particular build as well. Basically arguing both sides of it, but I love taking Ben Sinnott there.
What other, can you go down to our receivers and tight ends? What other stack options? Our big stack option is Deshaun Watson.
Oh,
well, it could be Daniel Jones. It could be Geno Smith or JJ McCarthy. We have a couple other stack options. It doesn't have to be Deshaun Watson, but he went. All right. We don't have to worry about it. We could just take a rookie running back here, though. We got Tyrone Tracy and Bucky Irving up near the top, and I think they're both very viable picks here as well.
Yeah, and Tracy's kind of an interesting pick fitting in there with having Neighbors again on this particular team. It has some positives and negatives in terms of if you wanted Daniel Jones as the late round quarterback to pair with Jayden Daniels in terms of what it meant full season, what it meant for the playoffs. Let's jump over here to ADP to make sure we're not missing anybody we need to have. It doesn't look to me like we are. I think that either Tracy or Irving, who goes a little bit earlier by ADP, both good selections here.
I think I'm Irving over Tracy, but do you have Tracy ranked ahead of Irving here?
I do, but not in a way that is meaningful enough to break the tiebreaker the other way. I want to try and get them both.
Okay. So we take Irving. Our running back room shaping up well again. ETN, Chase Brown, Zach Charbonnet, Kendre Miller, Bucky Irving. We only have Jayden Daniels at QB. We have Jamar Chase, Debo Samuel, Malik Neighbors, Xavier Worthy, Jordan Addison, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. That's a fun receiver room. Chase and Debo give you obviously the veterans, the top. Then we get the two really exciting, I think, rookie breakout profiles and Neighbors and Xavier Worthy. And then two really fun year two breakout profiles in Addison and JSN. Our tight ends are Njoku and Sinnott. It's Ben Sinnott. I always call him Sinnott.
I think that it's Sinnott based on listening to the college football folks cover him. But again, it's not one that I would swear on.
Yeah. The one thing about this year's Laporta, I came, Sean, I attacked you. No, I didn't. But I mentioned that on one of the recent Stealing Signals. Maybe we should go into this in a moment because we are 2 picks away. But now we're 1 pick away. I was about to go into it. Now I'm going to wait again. We still have Tyrone Tracy there. Do you like going RB6 at this stage if Tracy comes back? I'm fine with it. It still would be.
Yeah, I think so. Because then that would finish out our running back room. And then we can pivot back to making the final correlation plays work.
If we're going to need to draft another quarterback at one point is, something to consider.
I don't know. Jayden Daniels is going to stay healthy. He's going to play all the games. He's going to rush for 100 yards in each game, and every passing yard is going to be gravy. Jump into this year's Sam Laporta.
Oh, yeah. You also had Franklin and Mims in the queue there. I didn't realize, but that would have given us a way to play Knicks. That would have been pretty interesting too. The big difference for me, the thing that you got, so I know from a profile perspective, they're probably very similar, but the thing that you got me to completely buy in on Laporta in I wasn't super into him early because some of the tight end stuff, right? Rookie tight end stuff, whatever. Somewhere in June or maybe earlier July, you got me in. I started drafting him in some of those slows because I had him on a lot of those builds. Some of my best ball teams definitely paid off from that. So maybe it was even because I started those in June. Maybe it was June. I don't know. Anyway, somewhere in the summer was the combination of your excitement about his profile and the clear indications that he was going to be their every down tight end as a rookie. And there was very clear indications of that led into the preseason where they were like, we're not even going to play him in the preseason. We're not going to, they were like, he's our starter. He's our every down tight end. The Sinnott thing is confusing for me as it relates to Zach Ertz. We've talked about it a little bit. There's at least some gray area there with Cliff Kingsbury, the way that he had used Ertz in Arizona. And then the stuff about Sinnott being maybe an H-back, and maybe they treat Ertz like more of the traditional, route running tight end, and they use Sinnott as more of a move tight end or something. I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen, but I'm at least a little bit concerned. They gave Zach Ertz like $5 million to come in and cut Logan Thomas the very next day after they signed Ertz, and it was one of these like, he's our new starting tight end, transactional things. They didn't give him $5 million. Somebody told me they gave him $5 million. They gave him $3 million. One of the commenters told me $5 million, but I wanted to go check that on my own. It was actually $3 million. So I just lied to all of you. Yeah, I mean, that's the slight difference for me. I think from a profile perspective, it's still really interesting that you see that. Where I guess is the case that he's this year's Laporta? Is it in his production profile and all of those elements?
Yeah, you got the production in the final season, and then you have the athleticism. You have, certainly he wasn't drafted as early as Laporta, but I do think that and we lose Justin Fields right there, who would have been at least a little bit interesting on this team, I think. So we need to jump back over here and think about who we want to select. Then a few fairly negative things happened in that we lost Luke McCaffrey, which I wasn't necessarily anticipating, and we lost Wan'Dale Robinson. For me, this might be just go ahead and take Daniel Jones and don't worry about losing him.
Yep.
And
that's exactly where I was going. We have Tyrone Tracy now and Malik Neighbors. JJ McCarthy is actually a little higher ADP, and you have him higher up in the queue than Jones. But we don't really know that McCarthy's going to play in week 1. When we have Jordan Addison, we could have stacked him up. But I think even with Daniel Jones having the much later ADP, a lot more confident he's starting week 1, playing the majority of the games. We would have been if we didn't take Daniel Jones, if he went off the board, we would have been looking at a 3 rookie QB build, probably Daniels, McCarthy, Bo Nix type thing. I completely agree with saying screw ADP and going and getting Daniel Jones right there.
So we lock him up. That does also give us the potential for Jalen Hyatt. We have Bo Nix off of Jamar Chase, but no direct players there. You can always throw away a pick on Greg Dulcich, which gives you that combo. I don't think that we're set up in terms of picks that you're going to love for 17 and 18, but also this team is so, I don't say perfectly constructed, but the structure works to where we don't have a lot of pressure. I do like still taking some swings on Devontae Walker late. You had mentioned Rondell Moore. I think that DJ Chark has a chance to be something meaningful, or we could just get that third QB who goes with Jordan Addison right here.
Well, I think because we have all those options, can't we just take one of those receivers in 18?
Yes.
And take the third QB here. Or the other option is you can take Javon Baker first, and then you also have the out of taking Drake May or McCarthy in the 18th. But I'd rather leave our options open for 18. So if you want to take McCarthy here and then leave the receiver options open. So that gives us a build of a QB of Daniel Jones and JJ McCarthy. We can still take Javon Baker if he comes back around. But yeah, we could have tried to build a little New England thing there. Baker went 1 pick behind us. I like that. I like getting the third QB figured out. It's not our strongest build, but we now have 3 different stacked QBs. That's one of the things that is helpful when you do a 3 QB build, is to have them all stacked. We have Daniel stacked with Sinnott. We have Daniel Jones with Malik Neighbors and JJ McCarthy with Jordan Addison, with 2 of their more important elements in their passing games. Don't know if our bringbacks or anything are all perfect, but it comes together decently.
It does. One of the things for this particular team that is unfortunate is that the San Francisco-Detroit game in Week 17 is so exciting. We have D-Bell early, but we don't have any Detroit Lions. That's something that most of the time when you put that together, you're going to want to do. But then occasionally you will want to have, especially if you don't have the quarterbacks from those teams, you will want to have those guys separate just in case having together is not, in fact, the way to play it. This particular team also didn't set up that well to do any of the Week 17 bringbacks. But with the 3 QBs and with the hybrid QBs, that part I think is not as much of an emphasis for me on this team. And I don't really see any great ways to do it in round 18. Again, you want that, but I don't think it's as much of a must-have on this roster as it is on some other rosters.
So are you thinking wide receiver specifically here? Sorry, you just probably said that.
I don't think that you have to go that way. One of the things I mentioned is that with how strong the early 6 are, you could stop with 6. But you had mentioned Rondale Moore earlier, and he gives you the bring back with Jayden Daniels. So I think that part is pretty fun. I think that's the direction we should go unless he comes off the board ahead of us. I do think that Devontae Walker in the 18th, even having really nothing to do with this team, is something that you want to consider if you don't have their picks that you like. But then also Jalen Hyatt gives us even a little bit more of the Giants. So for me, it's probably Moore or Hyatt there in the final round. What other things might I be missing? The bring back for Minnesota is Green Bay. I don't think there's anything there. I mean, maybe one of the late. I don't think any of the late Green Bay guys are here. And then for the Giants, you've got the Colts, all of whom were gone earlier in terms of interesting players, unless you're thinking that you want to add.
No, let's take Rondale Moore to bring back on the Washington thing. I think that's great.
So then this is it. This is the team. We are finally going to see an offensive coordinator realize that you can use Rondale Moore down the field. Week 17, Jayden Daniels runs for 2 touchdowns, breaks off a 70-yarder, throws for 3 touchdowns. And on the other side of it, Rondale Moore, 8 catches, 7 of them at the line of scrimmage, but 1 down the field for a 65-yard touchdown. How about that?
I think it's perfect. I mean, I've never heard a more logical explanation for what's going to happen in Week 17 in my life. We wind up with the Jayden Daniels, Daniel Jones, JJ McCarthy build. Talked through the running backs a little bit, but who was our RB1? I already forgot. We took an early running back.
Travis Etienne.
And then Chase Brown, Zach Charbonnet, Kendre Miller, Bucky Irving, Tyrone Tracy. Got some rookie running backs in there after we decided to pass on Jalen Wright for Ben Sinnott, who was our so this is some of the weaker tight end capital I've spent in any draft so far this year. David Njoku and Ben Sinnott were our only tight ends. Our receivers, again, we started with 3 in the first 3 rounds. Jamar Chase, who was round 2, Deebo Samuel, Malik Neighbors, Xavier Worthy, Jordan Addison, JSN. That's 6 of the first 7 rounds, and then we don't take another receiver until the final round. Is that accurate? Very last pick?
Yep.
Rondale Moore. So from the 7th round, or from the 8th round through the 17th, that's 10 picks in a row that were not a receiver. We finished with a 3-6-7-2 build. Still feels a little light on overall wide receivers, but you're more comfortable than I am going lower on the total number of wide receivers if you hit it as hard as we did early with 6 in the first 7 rounds.
Yeah, and again, I think you can even stop at 6 there. If you're going to draft those 6 guys that early, you need to believe in them. But I'm glad that we added more onto the end. I think that, again, the balance here in terms of the way that you use your picks works out very nicely. You get the only one running back early in ETN, but then that is balanced out very nicely by that run from, again, round 10 to round 15. We take 5 different running backs. The draft is so strong at running back in that range. Ben, one of the things that you and I talked about a lot last year is that the traditional or historical running back dead zone was giving you a lot of options. It's very much back into a situation in 2024 where the traditional 0 RB build works absolutely perfectly. Now, there are a few names that I think you can still mix in, and that, I mean, Travis Etienne for me is one, and then James Cook, Kenneth Walker. You're talking about guys who have elite talent, and certainly for Cook, he's in an offense you expect to score a lot of points. I think that the Seahawks could be a breakout guy. One of the things that we did discuss on the divisional breakdown is how your Washington offensive coordinator could be the catalyst for us finally really getting what everybody wants from that Seahawks team. It does make me comfortable adding a number of different guys. And in this draft, as in many others, ended up with Charbonnet. I feel more comfortable with that gap between Walker and Charbonnet and going for the cheaper guy this year than last year, because I don't think that we have nearly as much built-in early season volume advantage for Walker as we did in the 2023 season. I still do think that Walker is the bigger talent and the guy who has the monster ceiling there. Tight end will be interesting. I do need that Senate pick to work. And I guess, yeah, I mean, every time that you bring up Zach Ertz, I'm like, man, why does Ben want to always make me so aware of Ertz still being in the NFL? Can't we have, fun things, especially if you've got Jayden Daniels, like fun things, Ben? But I think that's a very good point. I guess for me, Ertz has been washed long enough that I think this could be the breaking point where you get the young guy just very quickly establishing himself. And as opposed to being the head coach, hopefully from an organizational perspective, they're more bought in on the rookie. And if he does perform well, that's the other part that you had kind of alluded to, which is that, once the Lions started saying this guy is a superstar, you didn't even have to go out on a limb, really. I mean, they had already established for you what you needed to pick him at least where he was going. Now, the Washington rookie tight end is still a lot less expensive than where Laporta ended up. I think this is a good price range for making that bet that he could end up being the guy. He'll become more expensive if we get those good reports sort of filtering in throughout the summer.
Yep, that makes sense. I mean, I don't think he can't be the Laporta or anything. I mostly agree with your take while we were drafting that he's really shot up because people are backstacking Jayden Daniels, and he's gotten into there's not a lot of interesting late tight ends, right? So he's gotten into a range where I can't justify any of the tight ends behind him necessarily. Maybe Luke Musgrave, who's usually the one that goes right behind him, but certainly
and
not.
That was kind of the other pick I was looking at where I'm thinking, that pick works very nicely with our JSN pick, but he also probably wasn't going to come back. And so you can't take Wright and then say, oh, we'll just pick Musgrave because he's going to go.
You meant our Addison pick, I think, right? For
yes,
week 17.
Sorry.
Yeah. We drafted them right next to each other. But yeah, you're right. Musgrave would have went. He's another one in that range you can take. But really the point is there's no other tight ends beyond that are really even worth drafting. I mean, it's bad in the late round tight ends. I can usually try to talk myself into some guys that are going to run some routes. I took a lot of Noah Fant in the big board when you had the 20 rounds to play with. I think you can throw in some like Tyler Conklin maybe at times. I don't think Isaiah Likely has the upside that people do. I think that's a bad pick, actually. Once they went to the Todd Monken offense last year, they used their tight ends differently. It was changed Mark Andrews' role. His slot rate went way up. His ADOT came way down. Targets per run.
It's a handcuff. I mean, you're drafting a tight end handcuff.
You're drafting a handcuff, but you used to draft the handcuff in an offense that featured tight ends. And I don't even think this offense features Mark Andrews anymore necessarily. And when he went down last year, Isaiah Likely played like that. He didn't break out in some major, massive way. You're drafting a handcuff where the thesis a few years ago, like this is an offense that runs around its tight end position, doesn't even exist anymore. It's a different offense. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, I can see why Sanat goes there. At the same time, it's like, it's lofty. It's lofty. When you start to talk about like directly against the profiles of the rookie running backs that go there, I mean, he went in this draft, we took him right above Jalen Wright, and that was hard for you to let Jalen Wright slide there. Ray Davis and Kamani Vidal go right after that. Bucky Irving, we take in the next round. Tyrone Tracy the round after that. There's several good rookie running back profiles that can be targeted at that point. There's not as many great wide receiver options, but there's also some quarterbacks that you can still be stacking in that range where Senna ends up going. After he went, Stafford, Rodgers, Cousins all went at the next turn. So, I mean, the opportunity cost isn't nothing. It is, I think, relative to the other tight ends that are available. And I think you have to eventually take your tight end too, because you're not going to necessarily be able to do it at the end of the draft. So anyway, it's I think he's going in the right range. I just have a little people really shot him up there, I think, because they heard you calling him the next Sam Laporta. And so many people remember you being so heavy on Sam Laporta last year. Nobody wants to miss out on you calling the next Sam Laporta. But I'm kind of saying let's pump the brakes a little bit. 1304, where we took him here with Jayden Daniels when we didn't have anyone else stacked with Jayden Daniels. That's about as aggressive as I can get.
And I think that you were the one arguing for him, and I think that did make sense because McCaffrey didn't come to us in a spot that worked. One little note I would have as we kind of finish up discussing this one is, again, that sense of where the guys are going to go and where the tiers are going to go. For me, there's a huge tier break after Tyrone Tracy, so I was pretty happy that we were able to get both Bucky Irving and Tracy where we did. It's not that there aren't other good players. We discussed J.K. Dobbins in the previous draft. I think that Chuba is very good. He's obviously pretty squeezed. I think that Khalil Herbert is a good player, but very clearly squeezed. You're getting some Dameon Pierce hype. He gets picked in this particular range. Then we get a slate of guys where I guess I don't necessarily even think they're going to play. So, me saying that, I don't get to choose. So don't overly weight that. Aldrick Estime, interesting late. But again, you get that big kind of tier break. And so if you do have things set up to where you have the QB like Daniels, but then you can add some guys. If you are in on a Daniel Jones, if you are in on a JJ McCarthy, Connor O'Driscoll has a great piece that has just come out looking at these late QBs and how you can play them effectively. I think that you want to make sure you're considering some of those things so that you're not throwing away your round 16, 17, 18 picks.
Definitely. That's a real key. Closing out things late. You've got me thinking that I've maybe thrown away some picks with just like trying to get to a certain number of receivers. It's been a compelling point on today's shows where you said, hey, if you take as many early receivers as I know I'm taking in some of my slows, I could, you've argued you could stop at 6. I tend to not even want to stop at 7, but I think I'm going to be a lot more comfortable to potentially stop at 7. Those late picks, like even in this one, you could have made a case that we could have taken a swing on, I don't know, a tight end 3. I just got done saying there's no good tight end 3s options late, but something else. We didn't really have anything else, but that essentially that's why we waited so long to even take our wide receiver 7, that you want to keep making the picks that are improving something, even if that feels really thin somewhere else. I mean, that's a huge lesson in all of fantasy drafting. Like, you can't fix mistakes by making bad picks, And so, anyway, that's taking these really late round wide receivers, if they're not really compelling cases, just to get to 8 receivers or whatever, isn't going to be the answer either. I will say I'm pretty excited about the Rondale Moore thing. I think Zach Robinson's going to use him in some interesting ways. They'll do a lot of 11 personnel stuff. I think they'll use him in a lot of motion ways. They've done a lot of motion with the Rams. I'm hoping they'll do some of the stuff that they used with Tutu Atwell, some of that exit motion that got Tutu Atwell the free releases. Rondale Moore is not even as small as Tutu Atwell. He's short, but get him a little bit of a running start and get him running into some spaces in the intermediate range where you can get him pretty open, and then get him the ball and get him to run with the ball in his hands. I mean, he's very athletic. I think that's sort of the thesis for Moore. Not that he's going to play every down or be an explosive player or anything, but that there can be some explosive plays within that. So
I don't know. I mean, it sounds to me like it's time to get back into that second coming of Steve Smith narrative. I mean, let's get him going.
Just need to get him in a better offense, maybe. Yeah, I mean, Kirk Cousins is a good quarterback for that as well. I'm into it. I'm very into it.